Welcome to Stress-Free IEP. You do not need to do it all alone. With your host, Frances Shefter, Principal of Shefter Law. You can get more details and catch prior episodes at www.shefterlaw.com. The Stress-Free IEP video podcast is also posted on YouTube and LinkedIn, and you can listen to episodes through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and more. Now, here's the host of Stress-Free IEP, Frances Shefter.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our show. Today's special guest is Natalie Powell, who is a certified dyslexia specialist and a certified educational therapist based in California. So, Natalie, introduce yourself. Tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Thanks for having me, Frances. So as you said, I'm a certified educational therapist and a certified dyslexia specialist. My office is in Placerville, which is on the South Lake Tahoe side, kind of Northern California, but I have clients come to see me from as far as Fresno, Modesto, the Bay Area, San Jose, so up to 3 hours away, because I am one of the only certified dyslexia specialists within my region. I offer wraparound dyslexia services. So what that means is I offer dyslexia treatment, assessment, advocacy, coaching, presentations, all specific to dyslexia.
Wow. And you just do services in person?
So I do all of the client with services that involve the children in person, but I do offer coaching virtually with people all over the world. I've coached people in Egypt, Australia, Hong Kong.
Cool.
So I love that. And then I do presentations in person or on Zoom, like for school districts, private schools, that kind of thing.
That's so cool. I love that. Because like I say, I'm an international law firm also, because I've had clients in Germany. Because the American-based schools have to follow federal law here. So, but that, yeah, you don't think about it, I guess, with dyslexia, like that, yes, it's around in other countries as well.
Yes, exactly. I've even had some people in Canada, all over. I have a newsletter, which has about 600 subscribers, and the software that I use tells me where people are located when they're opening the newsletter. And I have several people in the Netherlands. I have several in Sweden. I don't know how that happened, but yeah,
awesome.
It's definitely becoming a worldwide, more well-known industry, the dyslexia services.
Right, which is good to know, because I know it's also, it's been around for the States, but it's been challenging until I would say the last few years of being able to get it on the IEP. Because unfortunately with dyslexia, if you don't dig deep enough, it doesn't show up. And it doesn't show up till you're older, right?
Yes. And this is the overarching issue really within my assessment practice. So a lot of the kids that I assess are older and have just kind of flown under the radar, or they've been tested before. Maybe they were tested in first grade. They didn't score below average. School said they would be fine. They just needed time to catch up. And then by the time they're in upper elementary, middle, high school, they're really struggling. And I'm reassessing them. And I'm finding they do have dyslexia, but it's mild. But it's still going to hinder them with being assigned the same things as non-dyslexic peers.
Right. Exactly. And I'm going to love to get your input, because I know for me with middle school and high school kids, I tell the families, like, yes, you can pay me to get a perfect IEP in place, but honestly, you're better off going to a dyslexia coach. And because they can't teach your child the way in middle school and high school that your child needs to be taught those basics, and they're going to miss content. So if you spend the money on the backside, outside to get the actual training the way it needs to be, it's just going to be better, money better spent.
Right. And unfortunately, starting in middle school, there is really no one-on-one dyslexia support offered. If a student gets an IEP, they go to resource, but it's like a homework help session.
Right.
It's a class.
Yep.
It's an actual class. So you go to the class, it's 30 kids, and you just really do your homework. So any chance for actual intervention remediation is pretty much not, it's not possible once kids get to 6th grade.
Right. Yep. Exactly.
Within the school setting.
Right. No, and that's why a lot of times I'll tell people, but it's common. I mean, I see it 3rd grade is really when it starts coming out. But what happens is like most of the kids with dyslexia are very, very bright. And so they learn how to compensate. And so they know something's wrong, but they're using the context clues. They're using the pictures. They're listening to what other people are saying. And that's why you can't see that they're struggling. They hide.
Yes. Another way that I have found they tend to compensate, and I'm seeing this more and more, and I don't know why. I always see these certain trends in my practice every few years. And right now, it's not only are they compensating with the context clues, as you said, but context clues from the adult that they're sitting with when they're reading. So when I'm asking a student to sound out a word, they will look up halfway through sounding it out and finish sounding it out while they're looking at me. And we're making eye contact, right? So that's not actually reading, because reading is looking at a word, right? So they are so in the habit of getting feedback from the adult that they're sitting with to guide their decoding versus actually knowing the sounds. So if I make a face like, they're going to think, oh, I did the wrong sound. Let me switch that vowel sound, right? So they're using you as context as well.
I didn't even think of that.
So that is something that I'm constantly working on with my students right now. I tell them, do not look at me. I hold a piece of paper up in front of my face quite often.
That's a good
because
idea.
they are and they don't even realize they're doing this. But as you say, I mean, they're clever and they've got to survive in the classroom. So they're going to pick up all these little compensatory strategies that really just become bad habits.
Yep. And that's also why it's harder as they get older, because they're habits that you now have to break.
Yes.
So I mean, with dyslexia, I know like with IEPs and stuff, you might need it for other, like the resource class is more for executive functioning is what I've seen taught, at least around here. But like, what do you say would be the benefits or the drawbacks of, like, you have a child with dyslexia, should parents go fight for the IEP or not? What do you think?
So with the increasing awareness of dyslexia, parents are a little more savvy, I think, especially since COVID, and they are Googling what they should do. But I think the most common advice they come across when they're Googling is fight for an IEP. Now, a lot of the time I'll work with parents where they are very certain they want an IEP for their child, and they actually know what an IEP is. So, things are progressing from pre-COVID when a lot of parents ask me what that even was, right? But they aren't clear on why they want it. They just know they should want it. So what I ask them is, well, what are you hoping to get out of the IEP? And what does that service look like at your school site? Because really, the quality of instruction that you will get if your child has an IEP varies dramatically from school to school. At some schools, still in California, there is no dyslexia-specific support in resource, even for kids that get an IEP in phonological awareness, right? So dyslexia, but they aren't offering intervention for phonological awareness. There might still be some whole language elements in resource. It may just be more homework help. It may be whatever we're printing off of Teachers Pay Teachers that day. So in that situation, when there isn't something dyslexia specific that's being delivered by someone with the proper training, I tell parents, you may be better off with just a 504. Because you don't want to waste the child's time. And you don't want to expose them to opportunities where you're telling them it's supposed to help them and they know that it's not. Because then when you're actually going to start them on dyslexia specific support, if you choose to pursue that, they'll have already had some unsuccessful experiences working with adults that were supposed to help them. So you want to preserve their belief that there are people out there that can help them learn to read and that they can do this.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense because, you know, for those that don't know the difference between IEP and the 504 plan, it's mainly the direct instruction. Does your child need specialized direct instruction? Meaning, is there a goal? So yes, we know the goal is, you know, working on sounding out words and nonsense words and all of that. But is that something that, as you said, that your school can even provide? Yes, legally they're required to, but again, where we say all the time, and it was a Supreme Court case, they only have to provide the Chevy. They don't have to provide the Cadillac of services. And
Yes,
and I feel better
yes,
about saying that because
yes.
it was in a Supreme Court ruling, you know, because at first I was like, that's not nice.
Yeah.
But
That's
yeah,
a
I mean, that's the
great
thing. And so,
analogy.
right, what does your child need? Like, as parents, if you're even watching this show or looking, I can tell right now, you guys are parents that want that Cadillac for your kids because it matters and it makes a difference. And so,
Exactly. And, you know, it differs also from state to state. So California is quite behind in this area. So as I said, I mean, often the reality is that local parents who secure an IEP for their child, they fought very hard for that. And then they find that the resource support that they're getting isn't actually working. So then they're kind of baffled and they're thinking, well, is this just how it's going to be? I mean, is my child always going to struggle with reading? And the answer is no, they absolutely can become successful readers, but that may not sadly be provided within the public school setting. And that's when the work with you comes into play. I work with a lot of clients that are working with a lawyer or an advocate, or parents really, they just decide to bite the bullet and get private support.
right.
And so it's really, it's so dependent on what the parents are able to provide. And it's sad because one-on-one dyslexia specific services should be what you get when you get an IEP in reading. But so often you don't.
Right. But it can, and legally what they're required to is as long as they're providing reading support by a certified teacher, that's all they need, then they're covered by the law. And it, you know, it's interesting you say working with a lot of lawyers and stuff of what you want. That's a lot of what I do in my strategy sessions is I talk through with the parents of what their ultimate goal is. Because it's very, very different what we do and what we get on an IEP. If your ultimate goal is you want your child to stay at the in-boundary school, period, no matter what, you don't want them changing. So then legally, can we fight the school and say that they're not implementing the IEP right? Your kid's not progressing. They need to provide more. Yes, legally we can. But what is that more going to look like? And that's the problem. Because it's more restrictive environment usually, which means a special ed classroom, which is not what you want. So let's look at where we are and what you want. And then, okay, so then we can still get an IEP in place if they need it for other things, or a 504 if it's just that, and then work on home. Here's a list of resources.
Right. Another thing that I've been running into is that as awareness of dyslexia is increasing and parents are wanting the testing for an IEP, school psychologists are overburdened with all these assessments that they have to do, right? So a lot more kids are being qualified for an IEP, but they're not hiring more trained resource teachers, and they're not investing in Orton Gillingham dyslexia specific support. So you end up with a small group, which may have been a small group 5 years ago, but now the small group has 10 children.
Right.
Which is also a problem. So it's not only about making sure the school has someone trained and they're using a dyslexia specific program, but how big is the group, right? Because really one-on-one is the gold standard. 2-on-1 is good. And then past two, like as even a group of 3, there are no 2 children with dyslexia that are exactly alike anyway.
Exactly.
So the bigger the group, the less specialized you are in catering to each child's need. And then sometimes these small groups, quote unquote, group of 10, are led by an aide. Who doesn't have any training in dyslexia.
They're
I
just given the
also
lesson
heard of
books of here's the lesson.
right, or they'll give, so let's just say the school is using a dyslexia specific curriculum. So this is something that I came across a couple of years ago. The school was using a program called Spire, which for any parents listening, it's similar to a Barton. It's slow moving, very comprehensive. It is designed for kids with dyslexia, and it has multisensory elements. The main one is using letter tiles, so magnetic letter tiles to build words. So this school said, oh yeah, we're using Spire, but without the multisensory component. So I went into the resource, right. So I went into the resource room to do an observation, and I was noticing the small groups weren't using the magnetic tiles, and they were sitting right over there. And I was saying, so do you use these? And they're like, no, we don't. We didn't use them. Too much mess.
Then you're not doing the program.
Right. Right.
Oh, so
and that's that's probably arguably the most important part is learning to build words.
Right.
Physically manipulating how words are made, breaking words apart. And that is what they abbreviated. They were saying it was messy and it was too time consuming. Right. And that's the other thing. So the sessions were only 30 minutes. So they had to cut elements of the program.
Right.
And that's what they cut.
It's ridiculous. Oh,
I'm sure you've heard it many times before.
Oh, I know. It's so funny because I say it often to clients on my show, in meetings. Like, I don't know why I'm surprised anymore of what I hear happens in schools, what teachers have said, what principals have said, what they do, why they do it. Like, it still amazes me that there are people out there that just don't, and I don't want to knock the teachers, definitely not, but like they just don't get it. They have to do what their principals told them. They have to do and principals have to follow central office, and whoever's making the decisions doesn't understand what's down here, and then the budget is as much as we say.
It's a multi-tiered problem.
It's budget, and it's sad. But I mean, that being said, what we have in school systems now are tenfold better than what we had, like even when I was in elementary school. Because when I was in elementary school, it was like, oh, you don't want to do special education. Right. Your kid will never go to college. You don't want, and they didn't know what dyslexia was. They just thought it was like reversing letters. They didn't understand the in-depthness of dyslexia.
Right. Yeah. So right now, I kind of think of it as we're at the tip of the iceberg, right? Kids are starting to get identified. Everything else kind of below the waterline is still very problematic. What do you do once you qualify a student? There are so many supports that are not yet there. Right. So just to recap for parents, you definitely fight for the IEP if you feel like you've investigated the services that are offered to kids that get an IEP for dyslexia, and your school is using a dyslexia specific program. They're not taking out the multisensory elements. The groups are not huge. These things all matter. Now, for students that can do outside support, it can be helpful to also have an IEP and to use resource as basically tutoring or a review. So for example, students that come to me, it's only once a week usually. So I can't teach them everything. I have to be very targeted in my time with them. And, there's a whole week that goes by between when I see them and when I next see them. So it's very helpful if they get some sort of review at school daily in resource, even if they're not learning anything new, just to prevent backsliding between sessions. That makes sense. So for kids with more severe dyslexia that are at risk of backsliding or where memory is a really big problem, I do often recommend that they do go to resource just as a review. Now, parents could review at home, but parents are very busy. And it's so much better if that can just be taken care of during the school day and after school, hands off.
And I was just going to say, and parents can't always get their children to do what they want, because I was like, with my daughter, I talk about my kids all the time, Hannah, who's 9. The teacher had sent, like, saying that she wasn't able to complete one of the assignments. If we could work on it over the weekend, it would be great. And I tried to get Hannah. She's, you're not a teacher. You don't. And I'm like, but I used to be a teacher. Like, even though I used to, but she's like, I'll work on it with my support. I'll work on it with my support. Like, she wants to work on it with school. So again, it's, yes, we can. But what I also like to say is, as parents, we have enough on our plates, and to then take the teacher role of our child, of now this is another role that my parent is playing for me. And it's that special time with your child that should be spent playing games, doing something different, not stressing about the homework, stressing about the reading stuff.
Right. So it's so helpful if that review can just be outsourced and built into the school day before the child's really tired.
Yep.
So they come home,
right?
And a lot of these kids are very stressed. They're internalizing a lot of stress during the school day. They don't want to show that they're embarrassed. They want to fit in with their peers, so they hold it all inside. And then when they get home, unfortunately, many parents tell me they melt down because that's when they just let it all out, right? So you really just want parents to be able to be there and support their child emotionally and take all the academic stuff out if you can.
And what's great about the resource room also is that even if they're not getting instruction, it's whatever, it's downtime for your child. And sometimes, you think about it, a 6-hour day, they get no downtime, and I had a client, we worked in 2 resource rooms because she needed those downtimes in between when her brain was having to work so hard.
Yeah, so that time can be a brain break too. Yeah, absolutely. So there are useful aspects. It's just important for parents to, again, as you guys talk about in your consults, really have a plan for what you're hoping to get out of resource, because it can be very helpful if it's utilized very strategically.
Right. Yep. Exactly. No, it makes sense. And that's again, the thing is, what do you want for your child? All of us want something different. I mean, yes, we want our kids to be educated and to be, good members of society and stuff, but like, what does that look like for you? What does that work for you? What does that look like for your child? Because that's the other thing is, some kids are going to do fine in the public school system, but the outside tutoring. Some kids need a specific special ed school that teaches it wraparound. And what do you want it to look like? And then reach out to the supports that can help you.
And then something that parents also don't know is, and I don't know if this is universal, but just in California, I will speak to, in middle school, because resource is a class, students in 6th grade don't get an elective because their elective is automatically resource. So, of course, student buy-in is very important, and many 6th graders feel upset and they feel like it's not fair if they have to go to resource and they're not getting an elective. So again, going back to what I said about you want the child to participate in things where they are going to see the benefit, so they don't lose their belief in them improving, people being able to help them, right? If they're going to lose an elective, what they're losing it for better be really impactful, right? And if they're going and it's a homework call and kids are talking, they're going to know it's not helpful, and that's going to create a whole other problem with motivation, which becomes, a bigger issue in and of itself for middle schoolers. And then in California, in 7th grade, students get 2 electives. So automatically one of them is resource, and then they only get the 1 elective. So sometimes what I recommend to parents is that they have their child tested for an IEP at the end of 8th grade. So the student isn't missing out on any of the electives, and they're not doing the study hall resource, but they have the IEP going into high school, because in high school, it does tend to be pretty helpful.
Right.
And it has a kind of different layout that is very specific from school to school, but it's not just you go to the class, it's 30 kids who are doing your homework. So that's something parents can also think about if they don't want their child to miss electives.
Yeah, no, that makes sense also, because for some kids, it doesn't matter that it's sitting and doing homework and talking. That's what they need. and they don't care about whatever, pottery or woodworking or whatever
Right.
elective. And that works for them. But for other kids, it's like, no, I want to take whatever that elective is because I want to learn about that.
Yeah,
So,
or that's where they feel successful, right? Like
right.
for art, if that's maybe their thing. So
Yep.
so many important things to consider for parents. It's a lot
Right.
for parents.
And that's why it's called an individualized education plan, because each of our kids are different, even if they have the same coding, even if they have the same diagnosis, even if they have the same similar scores, like it's just not like everybody needs it differently.
Yes, absolutely. And that's why parents sometimes ask, do you do 2-on-1 sessions? And I don't, because
Right.
it's so difficult. I've tried it, but it's hard because inevitably one child, even if it's just slightly, will be a little bit ahead of the other child.
Yep.
And when that happens, you feel yourself going to try to go in between, meet them in the middle, right?
Yep.
And it's so difficult. It's just, there's so much individual strengths, weaknesses, everything that come with dyslexia, every single case.
Right. It makes sense. And earlier is better. I know you were saying that of waiting to test, and I'm like always like, no. And I see the difference because so my kids, first and fourth grade, I had them both tested over the summer and both got diagnosed with dyslexia. The difference seeing my fourth grader and my first grader on what supports can be put in place is very different. Because my younger one is more than happy to get pulled out to work with a reading teacher.
Right.
My older one is like, no, because then what happens is that she falls behind on the content.
Right.
And so like, okay, we get the private for her, and like, again, like what it looks like earlier is always better because the kids in kindergarten, first, second grade, they're not totally aware of I'm different getting pulled out yet.
Right. And there's still a lot of grouping that happens at that age anyway. Right. So they might be doing centers, they might be getting pulled out, for the actual individual reading testing like DRA. Schools use different things, but there's a lot of coming and going and placing in groups. And sometimes there are ability groupings within the reading groups. So that is more normalized.
Right.
But as they get older, peers are also more aware of who's leaving the classroom. There can be, a little social stigma. And I don't hear that about every school by any means, but some parents have told me, my child's embarrassed to leave class. Peers say, where are you going?
Right.
So that can play
exactly,
into.
And it depends on who your kid is. Some own it and be like, I'm going to get help because my brain works different.
Or some are just so desperate for help they don't care. They're like, I'm going to get help. I don't want to stay in here for anything.
Right. Exactly. But and then some are like they don't want they don't want to look different and they want to fit in, and that's fine too. So I want to talk about accommodations a little bit because, so to teach the people that are listening, because the whole thing about this show is to teach parents of what they can do so that they can try and do this stuff without us support. But if they can't, then they'll come to us. But so accommodations for middle school. I mean, everybody knows the preferential seating, extra time, the general stuff. Is there anything for elementary school accommodation wise that you would recommend that parents might not know about?
So for elementary school, I actually reached out to a couple of clients that I've worked with in the past to say what has ended up working really well for your child since we worked together in terms of accommodations. And one parent said flexibility with reading levels. And I thought that was one that I even would never have thought of. But that's working really well for her son. So the school that her son goes to uses AR, which I mean, I'm not super familiar. I think it's like an FNP where, they're reading at a level J, or they're reading at a level 200, whatever. So the classroom has a leveled library where kids are only supposed to book browse within their level. So it can be very public because you need to go to your little book section.
Oh.
And sometimes teachers will not let them read or check out a book from a higher level in the class library.
Interesting.
So the accommodation there for him is that he can just choose whatever book he wants. So not only does it eliminate any kind of stigma, but it makes him feel free to be curious about books that might be above his level. And she said, if it's above his level, that's fine. We'll read it with him at home. We'll support him. We'll get the audiobook if we need.
Yep.
But there's a lot to be said for allowing the kids to access that higher level intellectual content.
Yep.
Just with support.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't have thought of that either. I'm writing it down to put in my,
are you? Yeah, I thought
my
was
sub
great.
aids. I keep a bank, right?
Yeah. And then by the same token, maybe he wants to read a book that's too easy for him. That's not necessarily a bad thing because he might finish the book. And sometimes when
not get frustrated and get through it.
Right. They'll just skip. Even if it's a book that's at their level, it's going to have words they don't know.
Right.
So they might just be skipping to get through the book quicker. Or, like a student I assessed yesterday, they may start a new book every single class period because they're not engaged. They're finding them all too hard, too dense, not enough pictures. So they're not getting that comprehension element of tracking a character, tracking events through a book. Right. She reads chapter 1 of a new book every single day.
Oh, she's really good at introductories.
She's really good. Yeah. So those are, again, some unintended consequences of these really common systems that are meant to help readers. But with kids with dyslexia, it can actually hinder them.
That makes sense.
So I thought that was really good. And then some others that I always recommend to clients, and I actually have a list of all of these, and I can provide it to you if parents want to download it from your site just as a reference.
We can put a link in the show notes.
Okay, so for student comfort, many are afraid of being called on to not only just to read aloud, but to give a math fact answer, because math facts can be tricky, to spell a word out loud, just anything where they have to do something on command. They're very nervous sometimes in class, which adds a whole other layer because not only are they maybe struggling with the content, but now they're also really nervous while they're trying to learn the content. So it's going to make it even harder. So a really easy accommodation that no one's ever had an issue with at a meeting, and it's no prep, is just don't call on the student without their hand raised. So simple.
It's interesting because I thought you were going to go, what I do a lot of times is advance notice before calling.
Okay.
So,
or ability to pass. Sometimes I say, because teachers still do round robin. And that's a plan for the entire class. So it's going to be obvious if they're going around and then it's like, oh, we're going to skip so-and-so, right? So just option to pass.
Yeah. And that's best practices anyway. For kids that don't have, that teachers should probably be doing in the first place. Not saying I shouldn't should on teachers, but, but it's just something, that is so easy to put in place that just makes the classroom so much easier. And probably behavior management too, because if there's other kids that are having anxiety about it, they might oh no, it's my turn. Let me misbehave so I can get out of the room, get out of this, and I can avoid it, right?
Right. Or, I was petrified of being called on without my hand raised in school. And I don't have dyslexia. I just was really scared of this happening for some reason. So while the other kids were reading and I was counting down to my turn, I would just be rehearsing whatever I needed to read and not really paying attention to everything else that's happening.
Exactly. Because you're yep, exactly. No, totally. And what am I thinking about? Going in advance. Right. So what else? Do you have others of even middle or high school?
So this one would be appropriate for middle school as well. And maybe even high school. So a second chance on math problems missed due to reversals. Now I'm thinking of reversals globally. So not just I write a number backwards. This could include reflections. So the student did the problem correctly. They wrote 12. The answer was 21. Let them fix that, right?
Right.
Because that's not an understanding error. That's a reversal. and it's part and parcel of dyslexia. So we don't want to penalize for that. And there are many other ways that this can look in math. Like I had a 6th grader I was working with recently who was doing cross-canceling with fractions. And, he cross-canceled, but he reduced them correctly, but labeled the wrong fraction. So he reduced this one correctly, but then he wrote the new numbers over here. So he got discombobulated there. So then, of course, the answer was wrong. So doing things out of sequence or top to bottom, things like that, I consider all those reversals. And I would always encourage teachers to just understand that is what happened. It's not that they don't understand what they're supposed to do. They just had a little working memory blip. So second chance.
I like that. And that, I mean, one of the things that I've put on is alternative ways to show knowledge. So doing it and then like having the child read it to you and then like, oh wait, no, that's not right. It's supposed to be this instead.
Exactly.
Or something else.
Another one I have is ability to leave school early or arrive late to work with a specialist. So again, this is something that it's no prep. It's just allowing something, right?
Right.
So accommodating in the true sense of the word. So I have some students that leave school early to come work with me, and that's partially because they're fresher. When we're not meeting at 4, we're meeting at 2, right? That makes a difference. But also in terms of the reality of scheduling and the 3 to 5 time slots are they're limited, right? And I'm not doing small groups. It's one person that gets the 3 to 4 slot on a Monday, and that's who gets it. So, some of my clients, they've worked with a lawyer to secure, private services.
Comp Ed,
only to find out that everyone's after school schedule is booked.
Right.
So just being flexible with when the child can leave school makes a huge difference. Because that can be the difference between a child getting the help they need or not.
Right.
Other ones, allowing oral answers whenever possible. Seating in a quiet area of the classroom, which is often not the front row. I always suggest next to quiet peers with back to windows and classroom door. So minimizing the visual disturbances as well of people coming and going, kids passing by, looking through the window, all those peripheral things that can make it even harder to read when all that's going on.
Right.
And then some parents, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say we use preferential seating, but a lot of times the schools will put preferential seating as a supplementary aid, but won't flesh it out, clarify location of manner. So for what is it for that child does preferential seating mean? Should the child, like for high schoolers and middle schoolers, should the child work with the teacher to determine what they think is best? Should it be selected peers are with them or not with them, so that we know exactly what the child needs and flesh it out that way.
That's a good point, because a lot of the accommodations that are kind of plug and play, preferential seating, extra time, things like that, they can be extremely helpful if they're fleshed out appropriately. And if there's a conversation between the teacher, the student, of what needs to be more specific in that plan. So that's a great idea also, who they shouldn't sit with.
Right.
Because sometimes there's a peer where the two peers together are a bad combination.
Yep.
And there are so many nuances of what preferential means.
Exactly.
Okay, so I was also going to mention, because parents might not know about this, Learning Ally access is a great accommodation to suggest. It's not really an accommodation, it's just something that they could get through a 504 or an IEP. So Learning Ally it's an app that reads ebook text as it's highlighted. So it makes it easier to follow along with what you're hearing. So you do get that visual component, which can have, marginal effect on fluency, because you're actually seeing the word that's being read to you. So there's a little multisensory boost there. It can also help kids keep their attention on what they're reading with that visual component. And it is a program that's only for kids with what they call a print disability. So you have to be qualified or nominated for Learning Ally by a professional. So a lot of educational therapists can nominate students. I can, but parents would then have to pay the fee to Learning Ally, which is, I believe, $120 a year. Whereas if they request Learning Ally access from their school, they could get it for free. And a lot of schools are Learning Ally members.
Got it. That makes sense. I didn't even hear about that. I haven't heard about that one before.
Okay. So
yeah.
that one's really popular locally. And I think
That's
it's
what I was
amazing
gonna say.
kids like it.
That's why I love working with people, like I have people from all over the place on the show, because something that's here that we do normally might not be where you are, and vice versa, So
that's why I love doing the coaching with the people in different countries. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And even when I coach people from the East Coast, they're like, what is an educational therapist? Never heard of that. We don't have those here.
Right. Yes, we do. I've had them on my show.
Okay, there you go.
Right, but again, that's part of the reason of the show, is that parents don't know what's out there and what's available, because they don't know how to find it. They don't know what to ask and what, you know what I mean? Like it's you don't know what you don't know. So.
Just a couple more accommodations that clients responded saying, so that I asked them, can you just ask your child what their favorite accommodation is? So I'm just going to run through what some of the kids said. So being able to type all assignments, extra time for tests, time and a half for tests, extra time on assignments. Okay, there's a theme here. They all are really liking the extra time. Access to the school audio library. So again, kind of Learning Ally, getting that audible access. Not being penalized for spelling, including in a foreign language. Being able to take tests in resource. So again, that's a really purposeful way to use resource. Maybe you don't think the reading intervention is going to work for your child, but they may really like taking a test in a quiet place with someone that can read the problems to them. So that can be a great use of that time. And then tests that they can write on. So typically once they get to middle school, you can't write on the test, but that is super helpful for kids with dyslexia. Also being able to take home a test to see what you missed. Big trend locally is kids can't take home graded tests. So I'll ask, why did you get a D on your test? Don't know.
Right, because you can't go home and read. And that's the whole thing, is like, if you got a D, now let's go home and teach what you didn't know, reteach it. Yeah.
And of course, it's to limit cheating, and I totally get it. But again, that's an important accommodation. No extra work for the teacher. It's just let the child slip the test in their folder, take it home, learn from their mistakes.
Exactly. This has been so awesome, and I know we could probably talk for hours, but we are looking at the clock. I'm like, oh, wait, we're getting close to time to end. This has been so awesome, Natalie. I loved having you on the show, and it's just so informative. Like, I love it because I'm even learning stuff with as many years of education and teaching that I've, done. I was like, oh, I never even thought about those. So I'm excited to have more on my list.
Well, I've gotten some great ideas from you as well, Frances, and you do such fantastic work with families. And I mean, I've worked with clients who were able to work with me through work with a lawyer, and that has been life-changing. Yeah. So thank you for your work as well.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Stress-Free IEP with your host, Frances Shefter. Remember, you do not need to do it all alone. You can reach Frances through schefterlaw.com, where prior episodes are also posted. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, and sharing the show with others through YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and more.